European interior ministers have vowed that the bloc's foundation will not be shaken by violent extremism. Ministers have pledged to strengthen border security, boost police powers and launch a crackdown on hate speech. It follows a string of attacks over the last month, most recently in Austria and France. Christopher Pitchers reports.
With the recent attacks in Paris and Vienna, terrorism has pushed its way to the top of the EU's agenda as the continent's Home Affairs ministers met on Friday to discuss how to fight against it. Among a range of new proposals, they want to strengthen the bloc's external borders, whilst also agreeing on finding a way to faster remove online terrorist content by the end of the year.
We know in the case of the attacks in France that terrorist organisations called online to avenge the republishing of the Charlie Hebdo cartoons. To me, this underscores the urgency of adopting the Commission's proposals for a regulation on the prevention to disseminate terrorist content online. And I'm grateful for all the efforts that have been done by the German presidency.
Ministers also want the European Police Agency, Europol, to be able to access data much more easily in order to adopt a common line in the fight against terrorism.
The
thing that is lacking the most is a whole range of measures which would make it possible to equip citizens, Europeans, Muslims and non-Muslims, to help fight against the real strategic threat posed by global jihadist actors like Al-Qaeda or Daesh, who are widening the gap between citizens on both sides of the Islam coin. We need to put an end to everything that confuses Islam with Islamism, jihadism, Wahhabism, Salafism, terrorism, etc.
The EU's latest migration proposal was also up for discussion, but for the moment isn't as high a priority as fighting extremism. The Commission will present new counter-terrorism measures in December, just in time for European leaders to go over it at the next summit.
Let's cross over to Brussels, where we can speak to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Good evening, Darren. This isn't the first time that a strategy like this has been launched. So why is the European Union trying once again? And is the bloc being headed here by the likes of Sebastian Kurz and Emmanuel Macron, all for domestic political reasons?
You're right in pointing out that almost in the wake of every terrorist attack in Europe, we have seen calls from certain quarters for Europe to take more action to tackle extremism that leads to this terrorism. Maybe not a surprise, clearly, that this has come in the wake of the attacks in Paris and Vienna. You're right in pointing out it is being pushed primarily by France and Austria. And there are some easy wins in this battle. Some would suggest that Europe's police forces do need to work closer together. They do need to share more information. But many of the other obstacles, as you've pointed out, Oliver, have proved pretty insurmountable in the past. There's always been talk about Europe's external border. Surely the migration crisis has proven time and time again how porous it is and how difficult it is to police. Again, France particularly has been pushing this idea of more stringent checks within the Schengen area. Again, that has proven quite tricky to reform over the last decade or so. And then when you come to the kind of wider aspects of what many would see as Islamism, or trying to tackle extreme forms of Islam, again you enter into this area that has proven quite tricky in the past for Europe and indeed for national governments to get a grip of. And so many would suggest, while this might be well-meaning, in the end it's unlikely to actually get to the root causes of what are leading to these attacks in various European cities.
And the plans have been condemned as well, Darren. You know, there's very, very serious concerns about fingering the blame here on the Muslim community and really isolating them.
Yeah, and that's why I was saying this really tricky area of, trying to take on Islamic extremism, because there's a very fine line by trying to tackle the threats posed by that form of terrorism, while at the same time not trying to alienate many European Muslim communities. And as you're rightly pointed out, many people feel that certainly in leading up to this document, and even the document itself, risks doing that. It is interesting, though, that the word Islam only appears once in this document. France, up until now, had been wanting to push the idea of Islamism and that extreme form of Islam much more in this document. That has not happened because of that concern of risking alienating Muslim communities by essentially stigmatising them, by suggesting that in some ways that they are in part to blame for these terrorist attacks. And many within that community simply think that is unfair, that essentially integration is a two-way street, that European governments need to realise that they need to operate not on a basis essentially of trying to put the blame on Muslim communities, but actually that Muslim communities need to be integrated much more into European societies on a much more equal footing. They would say that there are too many European politicians who essentially believe in Europe's Christian heritage, that should not be approach taken in 2020, and that they really want to tackle the aspects that lead to terrorist attacks. They need to be more understanding and appreciate that Muslims are Europeans too. And as I say, that needs to be a two-way street. A concrete example of this is this idea that's been propagated by Charles Michel, the EU Council President, that imams should receive essentially teaching from European authorities about how to be better imams when it comes to European values. Muslims would suggest, or certain sections of the Muslim community here in Europe, is that is not the way to achieve these things. It's been tried in the Netherlands in the past. It hasn't worked. What needs to happen is a more and a greater understanding of Muslims' concerns about their integration into European societies, and indeed our European understanding of Muslim communities.
Over the past few years, Darren, we've seen the rise of far-right extremism and terrorism. What has the bloc singled out in terms of its response to that threat?
Well, this is really interesting, is in they tried to keep it broad. As I say, they did not focus on one particular area or one particular religion when it comes to the terrorist threat. And indeed, you're right, you know, we have seen a spike in the last few years of attacks from the radical right. You only have to look actually at that incident in Nice in France at the end of last month, that attack on a church clearly carried out by an Islamist terrorist, but at the same time another attack just outside Nice in the south of France was actually carried out by a far-right extremist. And it is a reminder that actually the threat to Europeans and indeed to our society doesn't just come from one section, but also from various different attacks. And again, this comes back to the fundamental point, many would say, is that, you know what, by trying to place the blame, as some would suggest, to the Muslim community, and it is an issue that they need to address, there has to be a greater understanding that these threats come from various different sources and will only be properly addressed when those concerns are reached within all societies.
Thanks, Darren. Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, joining us there from Brussels.